The projection dimmed, and 300 alien eyes turned to stare at the single human seated in the Grand Assembly. Elena Voss did not flinch. She had learned over 4 long years that flinching was what they wanted. Tier 0, the concordant speaker repeated, letting the words hang in the chamber like an insult wrapped in formality. Non-combatant, no void fleet, no standing military presence beyond your own atmosphere. Correct, Ambassador? Correct, Elena said evenly. A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled delegates, the low clicking laughter of the Ixtar, the derisive flare of color across a Threnian's neck frills. Somewhere in the upper tier, a Voran officer didn't bother hiding his contempt at all. Then it is decided, the speaker continued. Earth's petition for Tier 1 recognition is denied. Again. Elena rose, gathered the thin data slate in front of her, and walked out with her spine straight and her face unreadable. It was the 4th denial in 4 years. Somewhere behind her she heard the Voran officer mutter something about toy satellites to his aide, and the aide's answering laugh. She let them laugh. Laughing species rarely looked closely at what they were laughing at. High Marshal Threx Khaldun watched the human ambassador leave with the flat, calculating stare of a predator that had already decided its meal. He turned to his tactical officer. Confirm the survey data on the Sol system's outer belt. Confirmed, Marshal. Rare metal density in the asteroid fields exceeds projections by 400%. The system is criminally underdefended for what it's sitting on. And their fleet? The officer almost smiled. They don't have one. A handful of orbital defense platforms, some interceptors barely capable of atmospheric escape. Nothing that could trouble a single Voran cruiser. Threx nodded slowly. It was, he thought, almost disappointing. A species with no fleet was a species with no say in what happened to its own resources. The Concordance's own laws made that clear. Sovereignty was earned through strength, and Earth had none to show. Prepare the acquisition fleet, he said. I want eyes on Sol within the month. 300 light-years away, in an office with no windows and no name on the door, Elena Voss received a message that had nothing to do with the assembly at all. It's time. Come home. No signature. She didn't need one. She had been carrying this particular silence for 4 years, long enough that some days she almost forgot it was there, buried under diplomatic transcripts and polite humiliations. But it never really left her. It sat in her chest like a held breath, waiting for permission to let go. She boarded the return shuttle within the hour, telling no one where she was really going. Far from the marble halls of concordance diplomacy, in the ink-black cold beyond Neptune, something did not behave the way empty space was supposed to behave. A Threnian long-range survey drone, cataloging gravitational anomalies for a research consortium with no idea what it had stumbled onto, recorded a fluctuation it could not explain, a distortion. Gone in less than 4 seconds. The drone logged it as sensor error and moved on because the alternative, that something massive and deliberately hidden had shifted position out there in the dark, was not a conclusion its programming was built to reach. No alien vessel had ever been permitted near that stretch of the belt. Officially, it was listed in Earth's public registry as an environmental preserve, a protected zone for scientific study. No mining rights, no survey access, no exceptions. It was the kind of detail that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Elena had seen the flagged anomaly report once years ago, during a security briefing she wasn't supposed to remember clearly. She remembered it perfectly. The shuttle broke atmosphere over the Atlantic at dusk, and Elena watched her homeworld unfold beneath her the way she always did, with a strange, aching tenderness, the kind reserved for something you love and are constantly terrified of losing. From up here, Earth looked exactly as fragile as the Concordance believed it to be. Blue and white and small, ringed by nothing but a scattering of civilian satellites and a few defense platforms that wouldn't survive a serious skirmish. That was the point. That had always been the point. She thought about the message again. It's time. 4 words that had been years in the making, carrying the weight of every closed-door meeting she'd never been allowed to fully attend, every budget line she'd seen redacted in council reports, every strange silence that fell whenever certain topics came up among the people who actually ran her planet's defense. She had asked questions early on. She had stopped asking them when she realized the answers were being deliberately kept from her, not because she wasn't trusted, but because knowing too much too soon made a diplomat's forced ignorance in front of alien scanners far less convincing. Now apparently that ignorance was no longer required. The shuttle's comm chimed. A secure channel, priority override, routed through channels Elena didn't know still existed in civilian transport craft. Ambassador Voss. A woman's voice, calm, clipped, unfamiliar. Director Okoye requests your presence immediately upon landing. There's been a development. What kind of development? A pause, just half a second too long to be comfortable. The Voran Dominion has filed a formal notice with the Concordance Registry. Resource Acquisition Rights, Sol System, citing Tier 0 non-combatant status. Another pause. They're calling it an escort fleet. It isn't. Elena closed her eyes. 4 years of quiet diplomatic erosion, and this was how it ended. Not with a vote, not with a treaty, but with an armed fleet and a legal loophole dressed up as paperwork. Timeline? 30 days until arrival, if their listed departure schedule is accurate. Is it? Another pause. This one Elena didn't like at all. We don't know yet, Ambassador, that's the development. The shuttle began its descent toward the Atlantic coastline, toward a city that had no idea what was coming, toward a meeting that would finally answer 4 years of silence, and toward a war that had just quietly, officially, begun. Elena Voss looked out the window one last time at the ocean below, calm and gray and utterly unaware, and felt the held breath in her chest finally start to release. It's time, she thought. She had no idea yet how right and how wrong that phrase would turn out to be, because 6 hours after her shuttle touched down, long-range sensors screamed across every monitoring station on the planet at once. The Voran fleet wasn't 30 days out. It was already here, and it was 10 times larger than anyone had been told to expect. 2 kilometers beneath the Antarctic ice, a klaxon nobody outside a few hundred people on the planet had ever heard began to wail. Captain Marcus Reyes was halfway through a diagnostics check on the Ares Vigil's port thrusters when the lights in the hangar shifted from white to amber. He didn't stop working. He'd heard drills before. But when the amber turned to red and the automated voice overhead stopped saying drill entirely, his hands went still on the console. Bridge, talk to me, he said into his comm. Captain, you need to see this. His XO's voice was tight in a way Marcus hadn't heard since training. Long-range sensors just picked up a fleet signature entering the outer system. It's not the 30-day estimate. They're already past Jupiter's orbit. Marcus set down his tool without looking at it. How big? A pause. Big enough that Command wants a fleet-wide readiness alert. All decks, all crews, now. He was already moving. The hangar around him stretched nearly a kilometer in every direction, carved out of bedrock and ice over decades by people whose names would never appear in any public record. Ships sat in their berths under matte black hull coatings designed to eat radar and starlight alike, not because anyone had expected to need them so soon, but because nobody had ever been foolish enough to assume they wouldn't. Marcus had commanded the Ares Vigil for 6 years. In that time, he had run more simulated engagements than he could count, buried more friends in training accidents than he liked to think about, and told exactly one person outside the program what he actually did for a living, his sister, and even then, only that he worked for the government, somewhere cold. He'd never told her what he was training for. He hadn't been sure until tonight that it would ever actually come. 6 hours earlier, in a windowless office above the Atlantic coastline, Elena Voss sat across from a woman she'd only met twice before in 4 years, both times in rooms with no cameras and no records. Director Amara Okoye did not look like someone who ran the most secretive military project in human history. She looked like someone's aunt, silver-streaked hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a cardigan that had seen better decades. It was, Elena suspected, entirely intentional. You've read the acquisition filing, Okoye said, sliding a data slate across the table. "I've read it. It's theft with a permit." "It's worse than that." Okoye folded her hands. "The Voran fleet isn't the threat, Ambassador, not really." Elena stared at her. "They have a fleet 10 times the size of anything we've publicly acknowledged owning, en route to our system, and you're telling me they're not the threat?" "They're a symptom." Okoye leaned back. "The Concordance has been watching Earth for longer than you or I have been alive, Elena. Every denied petition, every closed-door session, every Tier 0 classification. None of it was really about our fleet capacity. It was a test. A very long, very patient test to see what we'd do when someone finally decided we were worth taking from. A test administered by an alliance that's supposed to protect its member worlds. The Concordance doesn't protect worlds, Elena. It manages them." Okoye's voice didn't change, but something in her eyes did. "And right now, several hundred delegates who've spent decades calling us harmless are about to watch in real time, whether that harmlessness was ever true." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How long have we had a fleet?" "Longer than you've been alive, too." "Why wasn't I told?" "Because you're the best liar we have, and the only way a lie works is if the person telling it believes it completely." Okoye almost smiled, though there was no humor in it. "You've spent 4 years convincing 300 alien delegates that Earth has nothing. That conviction is the only reason the Voran fleet is walking into what it thinks is an empty system." Elena sat with that for a long moment. 4 years of humiliation, of swallowed anger, of watching her homeworld get talked about like a resource waiting to be claimed. All of it deliberate, all of it necessary. "I want to see it," she said finally. "Whatever we have. I want to see it before it's just a briefing document." Okoye studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "You will. Sooner than either of us would like." In the Antarctic yards, Marcus stood on the Ares Vigil's bridge, watching the tactical display fill with red icons pouring past the orbit of Jupiter in a formation too disciplined to be anything but military. "That's not an escort fleet," his XO said quietly. "That's an invasion force. Casualties on the estimate if they reach Earth orbit unopposed?" Nobody answered him. Nobody needed to. Marcus keyed the ship-wide comm, and for the first time in 6 years of training exercises and simulated drills, he gave an order he'd never actually expected to give for real. "All hands, this is your captain. Prepare the Ares Vigil for launch. This is not a drill." Across the yard, in ships that had sat dormant and hidden for years, some for decades, engines that had never once fired outside a testing bay began, one by one, to wake. Marcus thought briefly of his sister, 3,000 kilometers north in a coastal city that had no idea what was coming. No idea that her brother might not make it home this time. No idea that the world she lived in had a shadow fleet standing between her and something far worse than she could imagine. He didn't have time to call her. He wasn't sure what he'd say if he did. "Captain," his XO said, voice low. "Sensors just updated the fleet count. Give it to me." "It's not just big, sir." The XO's face had gone pale in the glow of the display. The lead formation just peeled off from the main body. "They're not holding position at the system's edge, waiting for negotiations. Where are they going?" "Straight for Earth, ETA under 6 hours. Marcus looked at the swarm of red icons crawling across his display, then at the black, silent ships filling the hangar around him. Humanity's best-kept secret, about to become its last line of defense. 6 hours before anyone on the surface would even know to be afraid. "Get me Director Okoye," he said. "Now." The comm crackled, then cut out entirely, not from failure, but from something jamming every frequency in the system at once. On the display, the lead Voran warship broke formation and turned its weapons array toward the pale blue dot at the center of the screen. The jamming lasted 11 seconds. It felt like 11 years. When the comm crackled back to life, Director Okoye's voice was already mid-sentence, sharp and fast. "Repeat. All SDI vessels are clear to engage on my authorization. This is not a drill. This is not a demonstration. Protect the planet." Marcus didn't wait for a second confirmation. "You heard the director. Weapons hot. Launch sequence, now. The Ares Vigil tore out of its Antarctic berth in a column of superheated steam and ice, followed within seconds by 6 more hidden vessels breaking cover from craters on the lunar far side, from silent berths beneath the Pacific, from positions no concordance survey had ever mapped. To anyone watching from orbit, it must have looked like the ocean and the moon itself had opened up and let something out. Aboard the lead Voron warship, High Marshal Threx Khaldun stood at his command station, waiting for the satisfying silence of an undefended system. He did not get it. Marshal, his tactical officer's voice cracked with disbelief. Contacts, multiple contacts emerging from lunar surface positions in low orbit. Signatures don't match anything in the registry. Impossible. Threx moved to the display himself. They have no fleet. Confirm your sensors. Confirmed, Marshal. 7 vessels closing fast. Weapons active. Threx watched the icons converge on his formation with a discipline that made something cold uncoil in his gut. Not fear, not yet, but the first unfamiliar edges of doubt. Return fire. Teach them the cost of this delusion. Lieutenant Sasha Kim had trained for combat every day for 4 years and had never actually fired a weapon at another living thing. That changed in the first 90 seconds of the engagement, when a Voron corvette broke formation and came screaming toward the Ares Vigil's flank. Weapons charging. Captain incoming bearing 317. Evasive now! Marcus barked, and the ship rolled hard as a lance of energy tore through the space they'd occupied a heartbeat before. Sasha's hands moved across the tactical console faster than conscious thought, feeding targeting data to the point defense array, calculating intercept vectors in the half-second window the corvette's own maneuvering left open. Firing solution locked. Fire. The Ares Vigil's weapons, adaptive phase cannons built from technology no concordance engineer had ever documented, punched through the corvette's shields on the second volley. It didn't explode so much as come apart, silently, the way things did in vacuum. On the bridge, nobody cheered. There wasn't time. Captain, 3 more inbound. They've retasked half the strike group toward our position, Sasha called out. They've figured out we're the flagship. Copy that. Sasha, I need alternate firing solutions now. Don't wait for my order. Already on it. She was, Marcus thought in the half-second he had to think anything at all. Terrifyingly good at this. Better than the simulations. Better than anyone expected from someone who'd been a graduate researcher in orbital mechanics 18 months ago before the SDI recruiters found her. The battle that followed lasted 11 minutes and felt like 11 hours. 7 human ships against a strike group of 40, each side testing the other's limits in short, brutal exchanges. Human vessels using superior maneuverability and shielding to avoid direct engagement wherever possible, striking hard and fast before retreating into cover. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't meant to be. It was a message. We are not what you thought we were. The message landed. Threx watched 2 more corvettes go dark on his display and felt the doubt in his gut curdle into something closer to rage. Full retreat to the strike group's rear line, he ordered. I want full sensor sweeps of every vessel we engaged. I want to know what they are, where they came from, and how a Tier 0 species built weapons that shouldn't exist. Not every human ship made it back. The Meridian, a smaller escort vessel assigned to shield a civilian evacuation convoy lifting off from a coastal spaceport, took 3 direct hits covering the convoy's final jump to safety. Marcus heard the Mayday call over the fleet channel, heard the voice of her captain, a man named Halverson who had trained Marcus himself 15 years ago in a simulator that felt like a different lifetime. Convoy's clear, Halverson said, voice steady even as alarms screamed behind him. Tell them it was worth it. Then the channel went to static and stayed there. Marcus sat with his hands gripping the arms of his command chair, and for just a moment let himself feel the weight of it. The man who'd taught him how to read a tactical display, gone, along with 60 crew, so that a few thousand civilians could get off the ground alive. Captain? Sasha's voice quiet now. I'm here. He straightened. Casualty report, full fleet. 1 vessel lost, the Meridian, everyone else reporting damage but operational. A pause. Sir, the Voron fleet is pulling back to the system's edge. They're not retreating, They're regrouping. Marcus nodded slowly, watching the red icons withdraw on the display, and knew this wasn't over. It had barely started. In the Concordance assembly, the footage arrived within hours, relayed through a dozen unofficial channels before any official statement could contain it. Grainy, chaotic, but unmistakable. Human warships. Human weapons. A human fleet that by every treaty and every filed report for the last 4 years was not supposed to exist. The chamber that had laughed at Elena Voss 4 days ago now sat in a silence so total, it felt like its own kind of verdict. Ambassador Voss, the speaker said at last, and his voice had lost every trace of its earlier amusement. The Concordance requires an explanation. Immediately. Your species has either violated the Non-Proliferation Accord in the most severe manner on record, or your government has been lying to this assembly for years. Elena rose slowly, feeling 300 alien eyes on her for the second time in a week, but this time there was no laughter in them. Only something far more dangerous. Attention. I have no explanation to offer, she said carefully, beyond this. My government does not answer to threats disguised as resource filings. A murmur spread through the chamber, some delegates outraged, others she noticed watching her with something that looked almost like respect. Before the speaker could respond, an aide rushed to his side, whispering urgently. The speaker's expression shifted from anger to something colder. Ambassador, he said slowly, we have just received an emergency transmission from High Marshal Khaldun's flagship. And? He is requesting immediate authorization to deploy a Class 3 planetary suppression device against Earth's surface. The chamber erupted into chaos. Elena stood very still at the center of it, understanding with sudden sick clarity exactly what a Class 3 suppression device was built to do, and how little time her homeworld might have left before Threx Khaldun stopped trying to prove a point and started trying to erase one. A Class 3 suppression device did not destroy a planet. It was worse than that. It cracked a world's crust in a controlled lattice of fault lines, deep enough to trigger cascading tectonic collapse across every continent at once, slow, methodical, and utterly unsurvivable. It was a weapon built for exactly one purpose: to make an example so total that no species watching would ever again mistake defiance for strength. Elena learned all of this in the 90 seconds after the speaker's announcement, delivered in a clipped, horrified briefing from an aide who clearly hadn't expected to be explaining planetary siege weapons to a human ambassador in the middle of an open session. How long? Elena said, cutting through the noise around her. Until that device can fire. The aide hesitated. Deployment and charge cycle for a device of that class typically requires 48 hours from activation. Typically. The Marshal filed activation 20 minutes ago. Elena didn't wait to hear the rest of the assembly's reaction. She was already moving, already routing an emergency channel back to Earth through a connection she wasn't supposed to have, and Director Okoye had insisted she carry anyway, just in case. Okoye picked up on the first signal. Tell me you have good news. I have 47 hours and change, Elena said. The Vorin have activated a planetary suppression device, Class 3. Silence on the line, brief but absolute. Location? Unknown. Somewhere in the fleet's staging position at the system's edge, past the belt. We'll find it, Okoye said, and something in her voice had gone flat and hard in a way Elena hadn't heard before. Elena, I need you to buy us time in that assembly, whatever it takes. They're already terrified of us. That's not exactly buying goodwill. I don't need goodwill, I need confusion. Every hour they spend arguing about what we are is an hour we're not spending fighting a war on 2 fronts. The line cut. Elena stood alone in a side chamber of the assembly, 300 delegates arguing about her homeworld's fate 1 floor above her, and understood with sudden and total clarity that the next 2 days would decide everything. The intelligence that found the suppression platform didn't come from a satellite or a spy. It came from a Concordance defector named Naira Vosh, a mid-ranking logistics officer with the Threnian delegation who had, for reasons she would only partially explain, decided that watching an entire species get erased for the crime of defending itself was a line she would not cross quietly. She reached Elena through a data packet routed so many times through civilian networks that by the time it arrived, its origin was untraceable: schematics, coordinates, a partial platform layout, and a warning. The device is shielded by 3 escort cruisers. You have 1 approach vector before their patrol rotation closes it. Do not waste it. Marcus received the coordinates less than an hour later, delivered through Okoye directly to the Ares Vigil's bridge. This is a suicide run, his XO said quietly, studying the platform's defensive layout. 3 cruisers, an active weapons platform, and we're bringing what? 1 ship? 2, Marcus said. The Vigil, and a strike team small enough to get in through the platform's maintenance access without lighting up every sensor in the sector. He looked at Sasha. You're on that team. Sasha didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. You've never run a boarding op. Neither has anyone else on this ship who can read those schematics as fast as I can. She held his gaze, steady despite the fear he could see underneath it. I can do this. Marcus studied her for a long moment, thinking of Halverson, of the Meridian, of how many people he'd already watched this war take in the space of a single day. Then he nodded. Suit up. The strike team's approach through the platform's outer hull was the quietest thing Sasha had ever done in her life. 6 people in matte black void suits, moving through a maintenance conduit built by an alien species for alien engineers, guided only by Naira Vash's stolen schematics and the increasingly loud sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. They reached the reactor control chamber with 11 minutes left on the platform's patrol rotation. What they found there stopped Sasha cold. The suppression device wasn't built on bare rock or standard Voron construction. It was mounted atop something older. Walls of a dark, seamless material that predated anything in the Concordance registry, carved with geometric patterns that made her skin crawl in a way she couldn't explain, patterns that looked, impossibly, achingly familiar. Captain, she whispered into the comm. You need to see this. Marcus's voice was tight with focus. The Vigil engaged in a running battle with the platform's escort cruisers to buy the strike team time. See what? The architecture under this platform, it's not Voron. It's not anything in the Concordance database. She ran a gloved hand along one of the carved walls, feeling something that was almost recognition. Marcus, I've seen these patterns before. In the classified files. The crash site. This is the same design. There was a pause on the comm, longer than it should have been. Focus on the mission, Marcus said finally, and something in his voice told her he knew exactly what she meant, and wasn't ready to say so. Disable the device. Questions later. The team moved fast after that, planting charges at the reactor's 4 structural nodes, racing the platform's rotation window as alarms finally began to blare through the corridors around them. They made it back to the extraction point with 90 seconds to spare, and the entire platform going critical behind them. The explosion, when it came, was silent in the vacuum and devastating all the same. A bright, expanding bloom of light that swallowed the suppression platform and its 3 escort cruisers whole. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. Not entirely, because in the half-second before the detonation, every sensor in the sector picked up something else. A signal, ancient and vast, radiating outward from the ruins beneath the platform, racing into the dark at a speed nothing in the Concordance registry had a name for. Director Okoye watched the signal propagate across a display in the SDI's deepest command chamber, and for the first time in the entire war, her calm, unshakable composure cracked completely. That's not possible, she said quietly. That signal shouldn't exist. That system shouldn't have been active for 11,000 years. An aide beside her, pale-faced, didn't look up from his console. Director, whatever that was, it's already reached the edge of Concordance-mapped space, and it's not stopping. Okoye closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself, then opened a channel to the Ares Vigil, her voice carrying a weight Marcus had never heard from her before. Captain Reyes, that signal you just triggered, it wasn't Voron technology. It was never Voron technology. She paused, and in that pause Marcus felt something shift beneath the entire war, some larger shape finally beginning to surface from water he hadn't known was that deep. It's the same signature as the vessel that crashed on Earth 60 years ago, The one everything we built was reverse engineered from. Director, Marcus said slowly, what exactly did we just wake up? The line was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, Okoye said finally. But whatever it is, it wasn't supposed to hear from us for a very long time, and now it knows exactly where to look. 60 years ago, before the fleet, before the Concordance ever noticed Earth existed at all, a vessel the size of a small city fell out of the sky over the South Pacific and buried itself 2 kilometers beneath the ocean floor. Elena learned this not from Okoye, but from a classified file Okoye finally released to her in full, 3 hours after the signal from the suppression platform tore across known space. A file with her name on the access list for the first time in her career. The vessel hadn't crashed. Analysis of the wreck, decades of it, painstaking and secret, showed something closer to a controlled descent. A ship choosing deliberately to come down on a world that had barely developed spaceflight, and to die there quietly rather than be found by anyone else. Its systems were unlike anything humanity had ever built, grown more than manufactured, humming with an architecture that didn't just function like biology, but responded to it, responded, specifically, to human biology, in ways no engineer on the reverse engineering team had ever been able to fully explain, only replicate. It chose us, Elena said quietly, reading the last line of the file. Not our system, not our planet. Us. That's the working theory, Okoye said. She looked older than she had 4 days ago, the weight of decades of secrecy finally showing through the calm. The vessel's logs, what we could recover, referenced something called a dormancy protocol. A fallback plan, activated when a civilization it was monitoring or protecting was judged to be in genuine danger of extinction. Danger from what? Okoye didn't answer immediately. On the screen between them, a new report was populating in real time. Sensor data from a dozen listening posts across the outer system, all showing the same thing. An enormous fleet signature, translating into Sol's outer edge, larger than anything the Voran had brought, larger than anything in the Concordance's own registry of known threats. From that, Okoye said finally. High Marshal Threx Khaldun stood on his flagship's bridge and watched. For the second time in 4 days, something arrived that shouldn't exist. The Concordance called it, in the oldest and most heavily restricted files of its military archive, an extinction-tier contact. Not a species. Not even, as far as anyone had ever confirmed, a single coherent civilization, something older, vaster, and utterly indifferent to the political architecture of the Concordance and everyone in it. Something the Concordance had spent millennia quietly containing, using buffer species at its frontier, expansionist, aggressive, resource-hungry species like the Voran. As unwitting sentries, an early warning system built from other people's blood. Threx understood, watching the vanguard force of that fleet appear on his display, exactly what his people had actually been used for all along. Marshal, his tactical officer said, voice shaking now in a way it hadn't during the entire human engagement. Our sensors can't even fully register the scale of that formation. Threx said nothing for a long moment. Then he opened a channel, not to the Concordance assembly, not to his own high command, but directly to the human fleet he had, 4 days ago, come to conquer. This is High Marshal Khaldun, he said, and the words cost him something visible even through the low-resolution feed. I am requesting communication with your fleet commander, immediately. Marcus took the call on the Ares Vigil's bridge, Sasha beside him, both of them still carrying the ache of the platform strike in their bodies and the strange, unsettling weight of what they'd found beneath it. This a trick? Sasha murmured. Maybe, Marcus said. Patch him through. Threx's face appeared on the display, and Marcus saw something in it he hadn't expected, not the arrogance of 4 days ago, but something closer to the flat, focused calculation of someone who had just realized his war was no longer the largest problem on the board. Captain, Threx said, I imagine you've seen what's translating into this system? We have. Then you understand that my fleet and yours are, as of this moment, facing the same threat. Threx's jaw tightened. I am not asking for surrender. I am asking for a temporary alliance until this system is no longer at risk of ceasing to exist. Marcus looked at Sasha, who gave the smallest of nods, and felt the strange vertigo of the last 4 days settle into something almost like clarity. 60 years of secrecy, 4 days of war, and now apparently an alliance with the very people who'd started it. Agreed, Marcus said, for now. Elena stood before the Concordance Assembly one final time, the chamber in an uproar unlike anything she'd witnessed in 4 years. Delegates shouting over each other about containment protocols and evacuation orders, and a threat most of them had only ever read about in files stamped with clearance levels above their own. Ambassador Voss. The speaker's voice cut through the noise, and for the first time, it held no trace of condescension at all, only something close to desperation. Your species' technology appears to share a signature with the entity approaching this system. Explain. Elena thought of the file Okoye had shown her, of a ship that chose to die quietly on a young, undefended world rather than be found by anyone else, of a dormancy protocol built for exactly this moment. I don't have a full explanation, she said, and it was, for once, entirely true. But I can tell you this, whatever that ship was, whatever it left behind on my planet, it didn't choose Earth by accident. And if you want any chance of surviving what's coming, you'll stop treating my species like a resource to be managed, and start treating us like the only people in this assembly who might actually understand what's out there. The chamber went quiet in a way it never had before. Back on Earth, in a private medical bay beneath the ice, Sasha sat on the edge of a recovery cot, still bandaged from injuries sustained pulling Marcus clear of a collapsing conduit during the platform extraction, refusing, for the 3rd time that day, to be sent back to quarters for rest. You should be resting, Marcus said, standing in the doorway. I should be on the bridge. She met his eyes, steady despite the exhaustion underneath. Marcus, whatever's coming, it's bigger than the Voran, bigger than anything we trained for. I'm not sitting this one out because of a few cracked ribs. He wanted to argue. He didn't, because he understood, looking at her, exactly the same stubborn resolve that had carried her through the last 4 days. The same resolve, he suspected, that had carried humanity through 60 years of secret preparation for a war nobody had wanted to believe was coming. Get cleared by medical, he said finally. Then you're back on the bridge. She almost smiled. Yes, sir. In the SDI's deepest command chamber, Director Okoye stood before a display showing the full scope of what humanity had built in 60 years of silence. Not the 7 ships that had fought the Voran, not the handful more that had struck the suppression platform, but hundreds of vessels hidden across the solar system in positions no concordance survey had ever mapped, built from technology grown rather than manufactured, waiting for exactly this moment. She had spent decades preparing to give this order and had never, until this second, fully believed she would live to see the day it was necessary. The vanguard of the ancient fleet crossed into the outer edge of Sol System. Vast and silent and utterly indifferent to the diplomatic architecture of the world it was approaching. Okoye keyed the fleet-wide channel, her voice carrying through hidden shipyards beneath every ocean and buried moonbase humanity had spent 60 years constructing in secret. This is Director Okoye, authorization code Sigma-1 Actual. She took a breath, feeling the weight of 6 decades settle onto 4 words. Wake the fleet. Across the solar system, in the dark beneath ice and rock and ocean, hundreds of dormant engines began, all at once, to hum to life. For 60 years, the true size of humanity's fleet existed nowhere but in a handful of encrypted files, known in full to fewer than a dozen living people. When it finally emerged, it did not emerge quietly. Hatches the size of city blocks split open along the floor of the Pacific, the Atlantic, the ice fields of Antarctica, and hundreds of vessels rose from the dark in formations that had been rehearsed 1,000 times in simulation and never once, until this hour, for real. Hollowed-out asteroids that had sat catalogued as harmless mining debris for decades, broke apart to release warships built from the same grown, resonant technology as the Ares Vigil. Cloaked hulls that had drifted behind Jupiter's moons for a generation slid free of their concealment and turned as one toward the edge of the system. On every alien sensor array still functioning across Sol system, the readings didn't make sense. Then they did, and the number that finally resolved on the Concordance Assembly's own strategic display made the chamber fall utterly silent. Not 7 ships, not the dozen or so that had engaged the Vorin. 341 vessels rising out of a world every species in that assembly had spent decades calling defenseless. Marcus watched the formation assemble around the Ares vigil on the bridge display, and for a moment even he, who had known in the abstract exactly how large the fleet was, felt something close to disbelief. 60 years of quiet sacrifice, of secret shipyards and unnamed graves, and a program that had asked its people to give everything and tell no one. And here it finally was. Humanity's answer to a galaxy that had never once asked what it was truly capable of. "Captain," Sasha said quietly from the tactical station, back on duty despite the bandages beneath her uniform, "Vanguard force is entering engagement range. Threx's fleet has taken position on our flank as agreed." "Copy that." Marcus opened the fleet-wide channel, 341 ships and one uneasy ally listening on the other end. "This is Captain Reyes, acting fleet coordinator. Formation Sigma, as briefed. We hold the line together, or we don't hold it at all." The vanguard of the ancient fleet came into visual range moments later, and the bridge went quiet in a different way. Not disbelief this time, but something closer to dread. The vessels were vast, asymmetrical, built on principles that made Marcus's instruments struggle to even parse their dimensions correctly, moving with a silent, relentless purpose that had nothing to do with conquest or negotiation. This wasn't an enemy that wanted anything from them. It was simply, methodically, erasing what stood in its path. "Sasha," Marcus said, "talk to me about that resonance reading you flagged." "It's getting stronger, Captain. Every ship built on precursor technology, ours, the platform we destroyed, it's all reacting to their approach, like it recognizes them." She looked up, something urgent in her expression. "I think our tech isn't just similar to theirs. I think it's the same origin. A branch of it. That's why the dormancy protocol chose Earth in the first place, not randomly. Because whatever built our ship 60 years ago knew this fight was coming and knew we could be made ready for it." Marcus absorbed that in the half-second he had before the vanguard opened fire, and understood with sudden clarity exactly why humanity had never truly been Tier 0. They had been asleep. Now they weren't. "All ships," he said, "engage." The battle that followed had no precedent in Concordance history, and would have none afterward. 341 human vessels and the remnant of the Vorin strike fleet threw themselves against a force that outmassed them 100 times over, using every advantage 60 years of secret preparation had given them. Adaptive shielding that shifted faster than the enemy's targeting could track. Weapons fire calibrated through the same resonant technology the enemy itself was built from, and a coordination between ships that felt, to more than one exhausted engineer watching the data stream in real time, less like a fleet and more like a single living thing. Threx Khaldun, flying his flagship directly into the vanguard's flank to relieve pressure on a faltering human formation, found himself thinking, in the chaos of it, that he had spent his entire career believing strength meant conquest, and was only now understanding what it actually meant to stand beside something rather than over it. "Marshal," his tactical officer shouted over the din of the bridge, "we're losing shield integrity. We can't hold this position much longer." "Then we hold it as long as we can," Threx said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant anything in years. Aboard the Ares Vigil, Sasha found the opening in the enemy formation nobody else had seen. A resonance cascade point where the ancient fleet's own technology, reacting to the precursor-built human ships around it, created a brief, exploitable feedback loop. "Captain, if we concentrate fire through that node, we can destabilize their entire forward formation, but the Vigil has to be close enough to route the resonance signature directly." "How close?" "Inside their kill radius, sir." Marcus looked at the display, at the tide of the battle hanging by a thread, at 341 ships and a species that had waited 60 years for this exact, impossible moment. Do it. The maneuver that turned the battle didn't come cheap. Threx's flagship driving deep into the Vanguard's flank to buy the Ares Vigil the seconds it needed to reach the resonance node, took the killing blow meant for Marcus's ship instead. A sacrifice made not out of obligation, but out of something that 4 days ago Threx would never have believed himself capable of. His final transmission, garbled and brief, reached the Ares Vigil seconds before his ship went dark. "Finish it, Captain, make it mean something." Sasha's resonance strike hit the Cascade node a heartbeat later, and the ancient fleet's forward formation didn't shatter so much as falter. Enough, in the chaos that followed, for the combined human and Voran formations to drive the Vanguard back from the system's edge and force whatever vast, patient intelligence commanded it to withdraw into the dark it had come from, wounded, and for now, unwilling to press further. It wasn't annihilation. Marcus understood, watching the enemy formation retreat rather than break entirely, that this wasn't an ending. It was a reprieve, hard-won and temporary, and enough. In the weeks that followed, the Concordance Assembly did something it had not done in living memory. It granted Earth full Tier 1 status, not through a vote weighted by centuries of cautious policy, but through unanimous, immediate acclamation. Elena Voss stood before the chamber one last time, in the same seat where she had once endured 4 years of quiet humiliation, and found, for the first time, 300 alien delegates listening to her in complete, respectful silence. "You called us harmless," she said. "You called us Tier 0, non-combatant, a species with nothing to offer this assembly but a resource-rich system and no way to defend it." She let the silence stretch, the way she'd learned to during 4 years of practiced patience. "We let you believe that, because it kept us safe long enough to become ready. But I want you to understand something clearly before this session ends. We were never weak. We were waiting. And the next time something threatens this galaxy, you won't need to wonder whether Earth will stand with you. You'll already know." On the Antarctic coastline, months later, Marcus stood beside Sasha on the deck of the Ares Vigil, docked openly now in a harbor that no longer needed to hide it, watching the sun set over water that had once concealed an entire fleet in secret. Around them, for the first time in 60 years, humanity's ships sat in daylight, visible, acknowledged, no longer a rumor whispered in classified files. "Feels strange," Sasha said, "not hiding anymore." "Yeah," Marcus said. He thought of Halverson, of the Meridian's crew, of Threx Khaldoon's final transmission, of 60 years of people who had given everything so that this exact, ordinary sunset could happen without anyone needing to be afraid of what was hidden beneath the water. It does. Far above them, visible now against the darkening sky instead of concealed within it, the lights of Earth's fleet began to shine, not in shadow anymore, but openly, among the stars, exactly where they had always belonged. Humanity had never been weak. It had only been waiting. And now, at last, the waiting was over.